Greetings everyone, this is Ohio Dan. I wanted to make a video on something I've seen within the men's community getting worse over time, something that I think is somewhat of a problem or a shortcoming within the men's community and including within the MGTOW subset in particular. And I'm not trying to criticize anyone in particular overall in this video, but I've noticed that there has been a decline in content that really gets to the issues that men have today in a way that offers practical advice based on evidence and based on reason and based on actually observing where things stand between men and women today and what strategies and tactics make sense from a guy's point of view given all that. So a growing issue I've seen a little bit more specifically within the men's community is an unwillingness to assess whether something is valid or invalid as an idea based on observation and evidence, and then to provide practical information to men on that basis. Not telling men what they need to do to get women, not telling men what they need to do to even necessarily abstain from all interaction with women, but to just give men the ability to look at what's out there and decide for themselves with their eyes open in terms of what they want to do with their lives, both in terms of how it relates to women, but also in general. What options are realistically available to you given the culture, given the legal system, given the politics of our times? What actually makes sense from a guy's perspective today, both in terms of whether you're going to see yourself as a family man, knowing what that means, knowing that the woman can just decide at any time to end that and take the house and take the kids, most likely, more often than not at least, or not choose that path and choose something that's potentially better that can lead to more fulfillment, even though you may not have children through that experience. And so we used to talk about those kinds of things, the hobbies that you could be involved in, the things that you could find important in life beyond women, whether it's your philosophy, whether it's your lifestyle, whatever it is, different discussions and advice that you could give to other men about where they could go with their lives, what interests that you could have. A lot of that seems to have fallen by the wayside. Now it's more about you need to think this way, or you need to basically just get over yourself because women just don't like you, and continuing to seek out this comparison with women's desires and how well you fit into that. It used to be that we had more advice and more useful information to give to men. And yeah, it's hard to tell men what hobbies they should have. It's hard to tell men exactly what direction to go in life, but you could give men the information and the evidence for what it is, and then let those men decide. Let each individual man that comes to this way of thinking decide for himself what he wants to do. And I think a lot of it has gotten away from that. We've also gotten more into this idea of one-upping other men in the community, making yourself look like you're better than everybody else, stuff that I associate with the male dominance hierarchy, which really should be part of the blue pill world, so to speak. But yet it's having a growing presence here within the men's community as well. Instead of good information that I think a lot of the MGTOW guys, and even to an extent some of your old school men's rights guys, even though you may not agree with their strategy of trying to change the system necessarily, they at least presented accurate information. They gave men a lot of the same information about here's what marriage means in today's society. Here's what basically flirting with a woman that you work with or go to school with could mean when it comes to affirmative consent, or in the post-Me Too environment now. Yes means yes, all this kind of stuff. Here's the kind of trouble you could get into by just living with a woman, because here's what the domestic violence laws are. If you want to go for it, go right ahead, but this is what you're up against. It used to be that we shared that information a lot more. And I'm not saying there was ever this idealistic view that there were never any beefs within the men's community or everybody was pure of spirit. It was never that way, don't get me wrong. But it used to be that the dominant theme, the dominant message was, here's what we see going on, And we're going to make other men aware of this. We're going to warn men. We're going to provide men whatever information they think is useful, and they can take what they want from that and seek out whatever path is right for them from their own perspective. That used to be the dominant theme. Now it's you're defined by whether women see you as an incel or not, whether they see you as worthy or not. You're defined by whether other men within MGTOW see you as being worthy of MGTOW or not. We're defined by all these things that are irrelevant when it comes to actually giving men good practical advice. There seems to be this growing reliance as well on preconceived beliefs and magical thinking to explain certain phenomenon, even as it contradicts what we observe. In other words, you see a lot of men that are abandoning what we used to see as very obvious stuff once we became more self-aware. Things like, for example, women really only care about you for what you can do for them. Yes, there are maybe some women that are exceptions to that, but overall, women get into relationships based on what they think benefits them. We used to be able to see that more clearly and say, women love differently than men do. When I first found the men's community, that was something that was repeated often. TFM, Sandman. You had a lot of content creators like Heartburn, Vention, Coterie. I'm sure I'm missing a few key content creators from the mid-20 teens on, but it used to be that was put out there, that no matter what anybody else may be saying about what they think is important, and you should still get married no matter what, here's the kind of position you're putting yourself in by doing that. Here's the risks that you're taking. Are they really your kids? Well, in a practical sense, no, because the woman can take you from those kids anytime she wants, because you are pretty much last on the list. It's the woman and then the kids and then you. It's her family, and you're providing those children for her. And if she wants to basically pull the ripcord, she can. And then you're still going to be expected to provide for those children that you may only get to see a couple of times a month from that point out. We used to share that kind of information a lot. And yes, maybe a lot of that has disseminated out into the greater mass of people. Maybe more men overall are aware of this. But the men's community has now decided that we're going to move on from that to instead engage in drama and personal beefs, or pretend like women have changed and pretend like things are somehow better now and we need to shift toward working together with women. And I want to get into some of those specific examples, right? Some figures within the men's community today will deny the validity of Briefolt's law, for example, based on the original idea coming from the animal community, or Briefolt was a sim, without sticking their head out of the sand long enough to look at female behavior, how it contrasts to male behavior, and to see that yes, women are pretty much, for the most part, behaving in accordance to the ideas, the postulates contained within Briefolt's law, and men don't. Men very often get into relationships that don't actually benefit them. They very often get involved in different sort of interactions with women that really are not good for them, that are not healthy at all. Women are very much more calculating. They very much are looking at what's in it for them. And the fact that you would have figures in the manosphere that would refute that or try to and say, but men just are only in relationships for what's in it for them too, that shows me that we're not about sharing good information like we used to do 8-10 years ago. Instead, it's this, we're going to pretend that men and women are the same again type of nonsense. That's one example. It really frustrates me to see men that really should have the experience and the observational capabilities to look at things for what they are and act like, women aren't just in it for themselves any more than men are. Yeah, they are. I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming for that. Other participants in the men's community will talk about how men and women just need to move beyond feminism and work together again, while not acknowledging the impossibility of doing this as long as the pendulum in society is swung so far in women's favor. They want to pretend like gynocentrism isn't a thing, basically so that women get to keep a lot of the gains that they've made through the first 2 or 3 waves of feminism, while at the same time not really acknowledging how one-sided against men things like marriage, the family courts along with that, the domestic violence laws, gender roles, the workplace environment, reproductive rights. They don't want to acknowledge that unless these things are brought back toward parity, there's no reason to take this seriously. Men and women aren't going to work together again, except for men to go back to what we would call the plantation again. That's the only version of this that you're going to get as long as things continue the way that they are. So you either acknowledge gynocentrism and do something about it, or there is no working together again. But yet this information is put out there as if somehow it's safe now to try to get married, or it's safe now to date a woman that you work with, even though Me Too is still a thing and it still happened. And the results and the consequences are still very determinate of what can happen if a woman accuses you of something. Nobody cares, right? We just need to somehow work together again. I hear that a lot in the men's community. At times, men on this platform will also express hope that one political party or another will save us through some sort of political solution or ideology without supplying evidence that gynocentrism will not continue to be largely endorsed by all major political entities around us. In other words, voting for Trump is not going to end gynocentrism. Voting conservative for conservative or Republican candidates or whatever party is supposedly the mainstream right party in your country, if you live in a Western country, voting that way is not going to do anything. They're really two sides of the same coin of gynocentrism. You have feminism on one end and traditionalism on the other. We used to be more aware of this. We used to realize that unless you're going to end no-fault divorce in the Duluth model, unless you're going to make it illegal to discriminate against men in a lot of different ways, there's no way that you're going to just reform things by working within the political system. We used to know this back in Barbarossa's time, but it seems like we've lost this knowledge somewhere down the line, and now we think that voting for Trump is somehow going to improve the situation between men and women. It's true that you may have a lesser of two evils type of thing going on overall in terms of your political preference, but this idea that somehow we're going to get rid of no-fault divorce now, which I see no evidence for whatsoever, or we're going to somehow reform domestic violence laws, or we're going to make it to where women are actually going to do something for men again that's positive overall in relationships and marriages, no political movement's going to support that, guys. And just as sort of a quick tangent, a few years ago, after or almost immediately after the Dobbs ruling, there was a referendum initiative, I guess you'd call it, in Ohio, where the right to a woman having an abortion was actually put in our Constitution. Now, people talked about how there wasn't a high voter turnout, and if more people had turned out, that it wouldn't have passed. It did pass, but the key element was not whether it passed or failed. The key element that I saw that proves to me that gynocentrism is going to continue for the foreseeable future is that the main argument by those against the initiative was that if you pass this, it'll hurt women. Women will be damaged somehow. And you see this a lot with the anti-abortion, pro-life crowd. They'll try to pander to women because they know that's what they have to do. They have to convince women that it's somehow in their interest not to have the right to an abortion of convenience. And so that just proves to me that it's all about who can be more gynocentric, who can basically give the message that you're going to give women more stuff, often at men's expense. Maybe not in the specific example I just used, but usually it's who cares about men, let's do more for women. All sides of the political spectrum that could possibly be considered mainstream support this. There isn't going to be a political movement in the near future. That's what the MRAs tried for decades to do, right? It's not going to happen. No one cares about men. I'm not going to get into that anymore in this particular video, but suggesting that a political ideology is the way to improve things for men in society today, I just don't think is accurate. Again, I think that's bad information, to be honest. You can have your political views, and I do, but I'm definitely not under the impression that that's somehow going to end gynocentrism or the one-sided nature of things between men and women today. It's not. Conservative politicians out there in many cases are just as gynocentric as your hardcore fourth-wave feminists are. And we don't seem to understand that anymore within this community to a large extent. When all is said and done, we should be evaluating ideas based on whether they are true in practice, using evidence and logic in terms of how those ideas can be useful to men, instead of making assumptions or attacking ideas in a way that doesn't address the practical value for men as far as whether those ideas can actually be put into practice or not. We should be looking at what actually can be useful information. Do you want to get married in this environment? Do you want to have kids in this environment? Do you want to live with a woman, given what that could mean because of the domestic violence laws? And in some cases, a few states in the U.S. still have common law marriage. If you don't have common law marriage, you still need to take a hard look at how things can develop if the police show up one day. Is essentially your property going to be her property if you live together? In many cases, the answer to that is yes. You could talk about, again, women really only get into relationships with men in a way that benefits them. You need to look out for yourself and see whether that actually benefits you, because a lot of the time today, it doesn't if you are a man in that situation. We should prioritize giving men good information based on what can be observed and abandon much of the nonsense that can't be tied to any practical value for men in the current environment. Whether a guy is an incel or not, whether a guy is successful at the same level as another guy or not, whether it's with women or with his career or with life in general. Why does that matter in terms of what we used to provide in this community? And I think within MGTOW and to some extent, even with the MRAs in the past, what value can we provide that allows men to make healthy decisions for themselves based on what they want versus what's not realistic? You have some men in the community who have decided to get married and will use magical thinking, I mentioned that very briefly, to justify it. Oh, I'm not a statistic, so it makes sense for me to do this. That's not good information. That is not good advice, in my opinion, to share with other men, because, to be honest, we are statistics, especially when you look at it at the macro level. Unless you are exceptionally good at vetting women or a woman, and along with that you're lucky, there's a very good chance that the woman's going to divorce you, take half your stuff, take your kids, take your house. Do you want to put yourself in that situation? For some guys, it may be worth it if they really need to have kids and that's their interpretation of it. I understand, but you at least have been given the information, or should be given the information, in a way that is accurate and presents how things actually are for men today. We've gotten away from that, in my opinion, since the time that I started making content and before. We've gotten away from actually providing knowledge, or at least our perspective on things as individual men, and instead it's this personal beef. My group's better than yours as a subgroup within the community. And you've always had different factions, don't get me wrong, but it was never in the past, rarely, not nearly as often at least, about one group attacking another group to see who was more MGTOW, or pretending that somehow men and women view relationships in a similar way, and men are just in relationships for what they get out of it too. No, they're not. And if you really believe that, I don't see how you can be self-aware the same way as some of the other men in this community are self-aware. It's just not accurate to think that women don't get into relationships based on what the man does for them, when that was the bread and butter. That was the initial discovery for a lot of us, was realizing that women don't love the same way that men do, and they see relationships as a tool in a way that men generally don't, right? Briefolt's law is pretty much proven valid as far as I'm concerned, and yet no one wants to share that information anymore for what it is, from what I can see. So I'm not going to harp on about this much more, guys. I just want to mention that that is one of the shortcomings, I think, in the men's community as it is constructed today. I don't think that we have the same level of good information that we're sharing. Yes, you can blame YouTube and social media to a large extent for stifling and really even more than that, really just shutting down a lot of good men's channels. But the days of Heartburn, Invention, Coterie, TFM, Sandman's videos before he kind of ran out of material to talk about, to be honest, those days seem to be gone. And instead, a lot of it has been replaced by bullshit. A lot of it has been replaced by absolute nonsense about men and women just working together, or just oppose feminism by supporting conservative political movements. That's not going to help. Conservatives just want men to basically individually provide for women still. It's been replaced by a denial of Briefolt's law. It's been replaced by a lot of nonsense. And I do think that's a shame, that good information does not seem to be as readily available as it used to be. And if this continues, the men's community is just not going to provide the same service to men that it used to. I don't know what the solution here is, other than to basically go back to making content about the core issues that matter, along with new stuff that seems to be, again, evidence-based, factually, logically sound, but a lot of it just doesn't seem to be as valuable anymore. A lot of the content doesn't seem to be as good a quality. I realize YouTube is behind a lot of that in terms of what they promote, but even within MGTOW, we don't seem to have the same clarity, the same goal of helping men that we used to. Instead, it's devolved into personal beefs. Instead, it's devolved into political sub-movements. Instead, it's devolved into nonsense about men and women just working together and that kind of stuff. And I think we need to be aware of that and do our best to continue to talk about the things that matter and to actually reach men with good information. At least that's one of the goals that I'm going to continue to have on my channel, and I think that should be the priority, and it's a shame that the men's community doesn't seem to do that as well as it used to.